Hello everyone, happy Friday. It's Insta Live on Fry. This is Audrey Button from Safe Harbors of the Finger Lakes. I use the pronouns she, her, hers. And so we're back because we were off last Friday. So sorry about that. It's been a little hectic. So today we're going to be talking about sexting, mostly focusing on just safety and just stuff to be aware about when it comes to sexting. I won't go too in depth about it, but it's just important to talk about, especially right now with technology being so popular in the, main form of communication, especially with COVID. A lot of people have, been online and using social media and a way to connect with others. And online dating is definitely a bigger thing nowadays too. And I know we've talked about online dating before and online dating safety. So that's a ongoing conversation as well. So before we get started, I'd just like to go over a couple household items. So I just like to give a content warning as some of the stuff I'll be discussing may be sensitive to some. So please take care of yourself however you need to. And just a disclaimer, the views and opinions expressed in this video are not necessarily those of Safe Harbors of the Finger Lakes, but of those in the video. And with that, I just want to mention we will have an Instagram Live next Friday. We're going to be, if you didn't notice, I did switch this Friday. For the last Friday of the month, we were going to talk about child advocacy today, but we switched that for the last Friday, and sexting is today. So next week it will be how to talk about consent with your kids, or just how to talk about consent with children. And then the last Friday of the month, we will be doing a child advocacy related Instagram Live. So make sure you check those out for the last 2 Fridays after this as well. And with that, we'll get going. So, obviously, if you don't know what sexting is, I'll give you, a definition that encompasses what sexting is. So sexting is just what it sounds like. So anything sexual with texting, that's what it originally was from. But it could be any sort of action or practice of sending sexually explicit videos, images, or messages through technology. It doesn't need to just be texting. It could be, video chatting, it could be social media, it could be anything that's happening, over any sort of technology. So phones, computers, tablets, anything like that. So with sexting, it's important. Obviously, we've had this conversation about consent many times. It's just always, always, always important to ask for consent before sending and sharing explicit content with somebody. And consent, and I know we talked, a little bit before about digital consent before. With digital consent, it's just consent that happens through the screens. So it's always important to ask for consent because you don't want to make anyone uncomfortable, making sure that they're okay with it and having that conversation, even if it's online, because people have boundaries and, it's important to get consent every single time. And, it's not okay to send, an unsolicited message or image to someone that would make them uncomfortable. Okay, so, obviously have that conversation. Make sure you get consent before doing any of that. And just be aware of the consequences. So before you share or send anything, there's obviously always consequences, and I'm sure you've heard this many times, that anything you share on the internet stays on the internet. And depending, obviously if you delete it and stuff, it's still there. You've tried to erase it, it's still there. It's just probably harder to find, but it's something to be aware of. Once you take a picture, you've made a video, or you've sent a message, it's still there in the world of technology. It might just be a little bit harder to find. So just be aware that there are consequences to your actions of sending or sharing these explicit messages, images, or videos, and just know that you don't have control over those things once they're sent to somebody else or they're shared with somebody else. So that's something to always keep in mind. So, never share the explicit content without permission or that consent with anyone else, because, that's, especially if it's somebody else's image or, video or message, you shouldn't be sharing that without permission, but you shouldn't even be sending stuff without permission either. So you should always be getting permission. So consent every step of the way. Okay, so obviously if the content is including someone under the age of 18, it's considered child sexual abuse material. And I know we've talked about this before, but it's also known as, I say, child pornography in quotes. They like to use the terminology of child sexual abuse material instead, because if it's images of a child or a video of a child, they cannot legally consent to that material at all. And even if they were okay with it and it was shared with someone else who was under 18, you cannot share that. It's considered illegal. Okay? So that's something to be aware of, the law and how that might affect that as well. So say someone is pressuring you to send or share explicit content or threatens to share your explicit content. That's not okay. It's extremely scary, I'm sure. They're not getting consent or respecting consent at all. So if you are saying no, and they keep pressuring you to try to get a guess out of you, they're clearly not respecting your no, and they're not actually getting consent. Because remember, consent is like fries, and I know we've talked about this before. It's freely given. So freely given means, obviously not under the influence of drugs or alcohol, but also under no pressure or coercion of any sort. So consent needs to be freely given, even over, virtually speaking, virtual spaces. So if they're pressuring you or threatening you, that is definitely not okay. And so they're not respecting or getting that consent. They're not respecting your boundaries, and it's a very unhealthy sign. So say you're in a relationship, or it's some sort of relationship, like whether it's romantic or friendship or anything like that. If they're pressuring you or threatening to share this stuff, that is extremely unhealthy, and it's actually illegal. If they do send and share that stuff without your consent, that is against the law. Okay. So someone sent you explicit content and you didn't want it, or you're uncomfortable with them sending it to you. Don't send it, obviously, along to somebody else. You should not share it with anybody else either. Maybe you want to have a conversation, tell them that you're uncomfortable with it, or maybe sexting wouldn't be necessarily a good idea, or to share that explicit content with you or anybody else. And then you would want to delete that ASAP. So obviously if someone else gets a hold of your phone, or someone hacks into your phone, because it happens. Technology is so complex in that way. You don't want anyone else accessing that and stealing it and then sending it along to somebody else. So I would, recommend you would want to delete it. But so say someone sent you explicit content of somebody else, and you want to tell that person who sent it that it's not okay, what they did is wrong, and they shouldn't be sharing that content, and they need to stop. So you want to tell a trusted adult. So that might not be necessarily a parent, but it could be, a friend, parent, or maybe it's another family member, it's a teacher, it's law enforcement, it's an advocate like us at Safe Harbors, whoever it may be. You have that trusted adult that you can go to and tell about it. So after, obviously don't show anyone else or send it to anyone else. But make sure you tell a trusted adult so they're aware of what's happening. And once you've spoken with that trusted adult, you can go ahead and delete that explicit content depending on what is going to happen. So just something to be aware of, having that conversation with a trusted adult if you do receive content that is someone else, because you don't know if they consented to it. They shouldn't be sharing, especially if they're under the age of 18. That's illegal. Okay, so sexting, it's one of those things. There's definitely been conversations around it. You're increasing, more so, especially in more recent times, because of everyone being stuck at home and people having those relationships online. But it's something to be aware of, the dangers and safety, and also just remember that consent exists online as well. You should always respect people's boundaries because they have them online as well, and communicating that, and always getting consent every step of the way. So with that, I will end Instagram Live for today. So make sure you tune in next week. We're going to have a conversation around discussing consent with children, and how that's important, because consent, is always mandatory and always important. We do consent in everyday lives. So with that, I will go ahead and end. I hope you all have a great weekend. Make sure you tune in next week. All right, thank you.